When Rand asked me to do a session, I said, great. I can't wait to come to MozCon again. I can't wait to do it. He said, well, how about doing it on Panda, which is like, you know, the Ebola virus of our industry right now. And I said, okay, well, I can kind of paint myself as this post-apocalyptic warrior. I'm like Mel Gibson when Mel Gibson was cool. We'll do it. I'll kind of go over what we're doing with our clients right now, how we look at Panda, and also what we're doing now versus what we're doing in the future. So I'm Matthew J. Brown on Twitter. Somebody named Matthew Brown. The army of Matthew Browns always gets my social media handles, so I'm actually Matthew J. Brown, and we're out in Portland at AudienceWise. So since we've read so much about Panda, and we've looked at all the Panda algorithms, and we've seen articles, and we've had conference sessions, I limited myself to one slide on the Panda theory. I'm not going to do 10 slides. You're not going to get 30 minutes of it. We know that it's either machine learning, and we know that it's quality rater based. So if you looked at some of the Google quality rater documents that had been leaked in 2007 and 2008 and 2009 that we're not allowed to talk about, it feels a lot like what Panda's doing is the same thing. Oops. Okay. The same thing, which is they've got a quality rater team, and they've got a machine learning component. So if you simplify this and say, okay, that machine learning algorithm is going to have, if you're targeting the long tail, your site's probably going to come up for a review at some point by a quality rater. It's really simple then. You build pages and you build your site to say, at some point a quality rater is going to go ahead, look at our site, they're going to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. It makes it a lot simpler when you're talking to clients or if you're in-house than saying, oh, there may be some on-page factors, there may be some things like time on site, or we might need to move URL structures. Just pretend you're going to get a look from the quality rater guidelines. And there's no whitelist. This was really interesting when they said nobody gets out of it on a whitelist. There are no exceptions. We're confident about sites that were hit. So we're looking at, okay, if it's just an algorithm, there'd be so many false positives. There'd be so many sites that got hit that weren't meant to get hit. But they're really confident about it. So it kind of lends itself to thinking that sites that get looked at by Panda get a thumbs up or thumbs down from an actual human rater or a panel of human raters. So what does that mean? That means when you go in and you're talking to clients, or you're in-house, you're talking to your team, and you say things like, I think Ian Lurie said it great yesterday, good enough to be indexed isn't enough. Good enough just to get your pages in the index isn't enough. Everything else is risky. Useful content, we can have debates about what useful content is, and I'll get into that later, but everything that's not great content is high risk. And when you say that to maybe some of your clients, especially some of your enterprise level clients, your CMOs, you're at the C level, you're saying, nope, well, out of these 2 million pages on the site, I got to tell you, based on this Google Panda algorithm, we got to pull 500,000 of them. We got to pull 20,000 pages off the site. I looked for a slide. I looked for a picture that when you say this and when you tell these CMOs, like, this is just what we got to do. Here's what encapsulates it. It's BS, right? You can't ground Spider-Man. You can't take this off the site. We're a domain that's 10 years old. We've got we got thousands of customers. I mean, we've got 10 million page views a month. You can't ground us. It doesn't work unless you go right into the strategy. You can't leave them there. You can't just say, hey, we've got all these quality cleanup to do. You got to have a plan when you go. So here's the plan. 2 sets of strategies. Strategies that work right now, and then strategies that are going to work in the future, how you're going to change how you publish, how you're going to publish against the long tail going forward. It's a little bit different than if you were publishing great content for short tail or great content on your blog. You're going to build links. You're going to do infographics. You're going to get lots of social mentions. But what if you're targeting 200,000 or 200 million different keywords on larger content sites or larger e-commerce sites? It's not easy to say, let's just build links to 2 million pages. Let's just do all these things. You got to have strategies that organize this into a sensible way. So we took a look at 50 sites, some sites that were reported hit by Panda that we all knew about, some sites that we knew in our little community of people that got hit that were survivors that were kept kind of undercover, and then clients that went to us, and we looked at the factors that, I'll give the standard disclaimer, correlations and causation, audience-wise is responsible for harm caused to you by this data, that sort of thing. But we wanted to see commonalities on the sites and what was good and what was going to stand out to us. And some of it was, pretty obvious, duplicate content. Content that appears in different URL combinations across, hundreds of URLs. Those are the comparison shopping engines and the article directories. And, a lot of these sites that really target, you can think of sites like Mahalo or sites like Easy and Articles, things like that to where they're really publishing a lot of URLs across the site in internal duplicate content. That wasn't very surprising. What was surprising is when we looked at these sites and we saw very, very low link metrics that correlated to these sites. So in other words, we looked at these sites and we didn't see sites that had that were hit by Panda that had a low number of links. And we didn't see sites that had a problem with too many affiliate ads. We saw problems with high ad to content ratio and surprisingly page load time. Of all the sites we looked at, so many of them had really, really low site speed metrics. And so that's kind of what we're looking at for our clients is what sticks out here as factors that could potentially kick you out to a quality rater and potentially tank a lot of your user metric signals. Okay, so in kind of looking at some of the sites that got hit, this is a site called RobTex, right? RobTex is insanely useful. If you use it in the search community, you can do C-class lookups and IP block lookups and block list lookups, and it's like one of the DNS tool services. It's really, really useful, but it's invisible now, so it's not even on page 3 anymore, even though it provides a really good service. And you can kind of see why. I think everybody can look at this slide now and say, okay, 10% of this page is content, the rest of it is ads. It's kind of burying what it's supposed to do in this wave of ads, and that's true across the site. But here's the surprising part. If you look at an Open Site Explorer, if you look at the link metrics, it's got the kind of stuff that we all look at that we love as search marketers. It's got almost 49,000 total links. It's got almost 1,200 linking root domains. It's got all of these social signals. It's got Facebook shares, and it's got likes, and it's got tweets, and all of these great things. And you're going, wow. So you're telling me all these external metrics point to yes on RobTex, and it's useful for users, but it got buried by Panda. Clearly, there's something going on the page level or on the content level that's not necessarily going to be saved by number of links, number of linking root domains, all the external stuff that in the SEO world that we really look at. And then sites that do rank, that's your next Panda comparison. It goes, okay, what's ranking now? If that's buried on, Page Oblivion, what's on what's ranking now? Like DNS goodies. Same kind of content, less buried, less ads, less things on the site. Look at the link metrics, they're terrible. I mean, compared to what RobTex had, they got 47,000 less links overall, fewer linking root domains. They don't have some of the awesome links that RobTex had, like links from DoubleClick Ad Planner and links from Stanford and things like that. So you see this pattern of maybe it's not about links, or maybe links still matter, but they won't save you from the quality algorithm that Panda is using. So switching gears and you go, okay, well, now that you know some of those things, and you see some of the patterns and sites that have hit and sites that weren't hit, what happens now? How do you proof it from a site-wide or a page-level strategy to really make it work? So the first thing you look at is, okay, the Wall Street Journal comes out with this ridiculous article that says hub pages got out of the Panda penalty by moving off to subdomains, which, it was absurd, right? We know that subdomains, it's not an escape hatch. They have a page now, it's hilarious on hub pages that says, come and get your subdomain, like it's a land rush out to the Old West or something like that for hub pages users. But they're not an escape, they just segregate bad content. So if you think about it, what they did is just said, okay, our main domain has a huge penalty. Let's go ahead and just ship everything off like, I don't know, the movie WALL-E, to like, you have all this garbage on the main planet, you go out to the subplanets. These subdomains aren't necessarily going to rank for anything. They're not an escape hatch. If you take crap content and put it on the subdomain, maybe that'll segregate it and you'll have the main domain's penalty removed, but it's not going to be an escape hatch. But we do recommend that, okay, if you have content that's poorly performing or content that's a little risky that you can't just wipe off of the site, subdomains are a good way to do it. You can put it on subdomains and segregate it, and hopefully you can get whatever penalty or whatever Panda penalty you have on a main domain removed by just saying, Google, here's some subdomains that are maybe less important than the main stuff that we had. They're not an escape hatch. They work like they always have, which is they don't inherit all the properties of the main domains. But not just subdomains. Something we learned about subdirectories and subfolder structures way back in the day when we were launching topics pages and article directories and recipe sites and things like that is Google's good at pattern matching subdirectories and folder structures too. So if we launched a topics directory that had 50,000 pages, and of those, 25,000 were great editorial curated content, and 25,000 were kind of placeholder pages or thin content, and they weren't as good, Google would burn down that subdirectory structure. If it was a topic subdirectory or an article subdirectory or anything like that, it wouldn't perform, it wouldn't get crawled as much, it wouldn't get indexed as much, it wouldn't rank as much, and they did it with URL pattern matching too. So you don't just want to use subdomains versus your main domain. You want to look at the directory structures you have on your site and also segregate content that way. If you have a poorly performing subdirectory, That's kind of the same deal as subdomains. Get your good content away from that and get it into a different subdirectory. We see Mahalo doing some funny things right now just to get out and try to stay one step ahead of the Panda algorithm. Now they're launching, they had answers as a subdirectory, which has been completely burned down. So now they're launching Mahalo-answers, and then they're going to launch, obviously, Mahalo-Q&A answers. So they're trying to stay ahead of the Google pattern matching game by doing the same thing. One thing we see working really well for both content sites and e-commerce sites is combining long-tail content onto one page. So in other words, you might have 20 pages on homeowners insurance previously, and that's kind of that whole Panda rule. Like you have 20 different URLs that you're trying to rank for a similar set of keyword phrases. We're seeing success on saying, okay, let's move that where applicable onto one page and see if that page can rank for 5 or 10 long-tail keyword phrases. This one for homeowners insurance, for example, it ranks for combining home and auto insurance, or it ranks for home and auto insurance discounts. It ranks for homeowners insurance discounts. The idea of moving that on there where it's applicable, and you can do it in an automated way, even better if you have a big site, and then tracking that and saying, wow, this landing page in analytics, now it ranks for 18 different keywords that are bringing in traffic, rather than splitting your user engagement metrics and your link metrics and your social sharing signals. Rather than splitting it across the universe, all of a sudden you're combining these onto pages that perform better, rank better, have better content, have better user signals. And so you're really trying to consolidate quality rather than split it out across the sites. So that's about what you can do from a site-wide level. Page-wide level, we're looking at it as being far more important. So from a page-wide level, you may have heard about Andrew Hansen, who is an affiliate marketer that got a very, very detailed response from the Google AdWords team. That said things like, hey, you need 30% of the usable content on your page to be unique and not derivative or ads. The site is considered compliant if there's more content than ads on the page. Really detailed stuff, like if you open your browser to 1024 by 768, the area above the fold should definitely be more content than ads. All of this ridiculously detailed stuff. And you wonder, is the Google organic team, is their organic quality score starting to mirror something like this? Are they looking at ad to content ratio? And it looks like, based on some of the Panda sites that we've been hit, they are. They're making sure that the pages can exist on their own. They're not designed just to bounce users to other places on your site. They're not designed to bounce users to other ads or other ad networks. So that's something that we're taking a pretty close look at. And you know it when you see it. If you work in SEO or SEM, you've seen this all the time. Ad blocks that are way above the content, they push content down below the fold. They're not necessarily relevant or on topic. I mean, it's sort of like obscenity. You know it when you see it. So our general rule to our clients is just make sure the ads don't interfere with the content on the page. Make sure that they're down below the fold and that there's not too many of them. There's not a bigger ratio of ads to content on the site. We're really worried about site speed. Site speed seems to be, and if you think about it, all the things that we've thought about Panda, our user engagement metrics, are they playing a big role? Site speed could tank all of them. It could tank time on site, it could tank bounce rate, it could tank page views per visit, all of those user engagement metrics that we're really talking about now. Bad site speed, I mean, that would blow all of them out of the water. What if your site was performing poorly for an entire day? I mean, Google would have a giant stack of poor user engagement metrics at the end of the day, and so would Bing. We look at it as you'll see pages on the site where your bounce rate and your exit rate, if they're consuming other pages on your site, will fall off this cliff or actually jump up dramatically when you get to like that 9, 10, 11 second range. So you're looking for these spikes where you say, okay, wow, well, this page, these type of pages on the site, paginated articles, they normally have an exit rate of 53%, but wow, on some of these that are like loading above 9 or 10 seconds, wow, these pages jump up to 85% exit rate. Or when people come on the site, the bounce rate jumps dramatically up. That's kind of a way to gauge your threshold of, wow, we need to start troubleshooting these, see what the problem is with third-party ad calls, content delivery networks, things like that. Stefan's whole presentation was kind of a good intro to me looking at the future and social signals from a search marketer's perspective. But definitely these are going to play a huge role as to when the machine learning algorithm and the quality team start getting a hold of, okay, are users consuming the site? Are they getting tweets and shares and likes and things like that? Studies are starting to get scary. Now, this is a study done by the NYT and how users share, whereas users have personas to where they're more prone to sharing at some points in the search cycle and some points on their web surfing cycle than when they're not. So if a user, and this is important on the long tail, if a user isn't in sharing mode, if they're in research mode or in intent mode, they're much less likely to click on those Facebook like buttons or those Twitter share buttons. And so for long tail, for great content, for like marquee content on your site, that doesn't seem to be too problematic. But if you start getting into long tail where they're in research mode, that looks a little scary. And the stats are coming out like less than half of users are actually interested in sharing products and information about products. And 94% are considering how useful the information they're sharing will be. So in other words, they don't want to put necessarily your product page on Facebook or on Twitter. They're trying to share information where they're like, oh, this will be really relevant, or this is content that's greater than the usual content that you see. That's scary because if you're on the long tail, you're like, am I going to get any sharing metrics on 200,000 pages on my site? How can we make that happen? And so optimizing click-throughs and call to actions on sharing, that, we're looking carefully at that. So for example, this is an OKQ but OK Trends dropdown that happens. So when you scroll down the page, you get the sharing that drops down when you've consumed some of the article. I think Rand has highlighted this before, and it's great. I mean, you see the blindness at the bottom of the screen, the usual, like here's Twitter, here's Facebook, blah, blah, blah. But when you see that dropdown happen, it cues the user. It's all the visual cues we've seen in eye tracking studies. So we're looking at things like, OK, yeah, let's drop that down. And you can do this in WordPress. This developer, Danny Van Kooten, he has a WordPress that's just a scroll-triggered box. So you can start playing around with that on your site, even if you have a WordPress blog, and saying, OK, scroll this far down the page, now hit users with a drop-down that cues them as a call to action. I'm not going to explain why I'm on a site called My Paper Girlfriend. Sometimes I just want to talk it out. It's on stayteen.org. I actually have a teenager at home, so I'm allowed to be on this site. But I love embedded calls to action for sharing. I think that that's much better than saying, for this audience, let's go ahead and put the usual sharing mechanisms on the top left of the screen or the bottom right, make it part of the content, and then have that pop up with a different sharing option. So getting creative with motivating users to share through calls to action, that's kind of like the new conversion rate optimization across the long tail for sharing and getting people to give you those shares and likes. As far as micro conversions are concerned, if we're concerned about, oh, well, are users scrolling? Are they clicking print-friendly pages? Some of the stuff we've seen come out, about Panda, that we have to have all these user engagement signals. RSS and email have to be two of the most powerful ones, right? I mean, email is still, by far and away, the #1 converting marketing mechanism. If you can cue users to queue up email subscriptions, that's got to be a huge signal, right? And RSS feeds, we see sites mess this up all the time. Make sure that you aggregate useful RSS feeds and promote them heavily on your site, rather than just saying there's a small orange button either at the browser bar or at the top there. If you have a page that says, hey, you can get updated products, you can get products on clearance, you can get blogs, you can get these very useful RSS feeds, we've seen sites massively improve those micro conversions, which obviously it's good for business, and it's good for feeding back those user signals to Google and Bing. OK, Stefan, absolutely did a great intro to this. I'm going to botch this compared to what he said about structured data. But structured data like schema, obviously it's going to be something where we give the engines much more reliable, valid data about what's on our pages. So, if you look at this article, like this is Best Buy. Best Buy implemented RDFA on their products. Their lead engineer, Jay Myers, he got 30% in like 6 months just by getting those annotated results into Google. And they had a 30% lift in organic search traffic. So once you get in, it's almost certainly those annotated results are going to perform better for you. Schema Creator is something that Raven launched that's really easy just to kind of experiment with it. Throw HTML onto your page that's marked up with Schema Creator and see what happens. Now, Stefan was right. You're not necessarily going to get whitelisted into annotated results right away, but this is kind of a painless way to get started with it. And I've also included a link to adding schema to WordPress. There's a couple tricky things about adding schema to WordPress. It's more designed, that microdata is more designed for HTML5, but this is a good way to get, kind of experiment and play around with it. We're not really sure whether or not, I realize the engines are saying it's going to be schema, it's going to be microdata, you got to go that way. There's a lot of RDFA out there, and a lot of the community, the structured data community, has been focused on RDFA tools, ontologies, vocabularies, parsers. Bing recently announced, I think it was 2 weeks ago or a week ago, oh, hey, don't worry about it. You can put RDFA on your site. We still support that. You can put microformats on your site. We can still support that. There was a great question about what's the W3C say about this? Are they going to support only microdata, or what are they going to say about RDFA? There's a lot of signs in the community that there's going to be kind of a mix of using these kind of different formats for your structured data. For example, Stefan brought up the schema blog. They're meeting in September 21st. They have a blog on the site now. They're going to start hammering out these standards. It might not just be as simple as, hey, if you do search engine marketing, you go with schema and don't look back. there may be a little more nuance to it. So we're seeing signs that the engines are definitely moving forward and trying to play nice with the RDF community. I set out to make the worst slide in the world, and I think I did it right here. But what this is an ontology that actually exists on the schema.org site. It's not in the navigation. You can only find it by going there from developer blogs that link to it. But what it is now the schema site has an ontology or a language that says, if you're doing schema data, you can feed this ontology into other formats like RDFA. It's a bridge to like RDFA or micro formats or other things on the site. Why is this important? Why does this exist on schema.org? This is a bridge to saying, we know that developers and sites have all these different tools for marking up sites and marking up micro formats. This is a way to play nice with schema. So we're seeing these little gradual moves in a direction that it might not just be microdata. There might be kind of a unification effort, and you can use all three things when you're doing that. So just kind of pay attention to what's going on with that September 21st event, that semantic web event that Stefan was talking about, because this is a really evolving space, and you may see more things about it. OK, so the dilemma here is you've got your site dialed in. It's not Panda proof. It's never going to be totally proof. But you got your site dialed in, so you're saying, OK, we feel good about it. How do you make great content now across the long tail that's not just scalable, but it's profitable? So for example, if you search for narrow shoes for men, you get pages like this on ShoeBuy. We've all seen it. There's just search boxes. There's some really optimized text at the top and at the bottom of the site. It's kind of hard to say whether or not this is risky, but it's definitely not what we're looking at. You look at Zappos, and Zappos is kind of the king of, Zappos, Amazon, eBay. These are the kings of e-commerce content. I'm picking on my friend Adam Audet here because this may not be great content, but it's useful. It has a search box. It has some narrow shoes text. There's some text at the bottom of the screen that's clearly written by a human. It links out to brands about narrow shoes. It's got all the things that we're doing in the SEO world to make, OK, this is a long tail landing page. It's got what the engines need. It's useful for users. I don't know if it's great content, but it's definitely useful, and definitely it ranks #1. It feels like the past. This feels like this won't be how you target long-tail search traffic in 10 years or 20 years. Demand media is trying to scale up, and we've seen how well this works when you say, let's just hire an army of people to write content like that across the long tail. It's not efficient, and it's not necessarily profitable. So here's the future. This kind of ties into what Stefan was saying about linked data and a web of things and not objects. Linked data is a web of, we know what the red stapler is. It's not just an HTML call that pulls up a document. We know that it's a stapler, it's red, and it staples things. If you use linked data and you start getting into this, and this is kind of, you can think of structured data and micro formats and marking up things in structured data as kind of a gateway drug to linked data and how you can do things with linked data. You can do that to combine different data types. And so this is something as a search marketer, the people that get on this early are definitely going to have advantages to the people that, oh, I marked up my data, I get rich snippets, but we're not doing anything with the data. So this is a very basic diagram of how you could work with linked data. You take 3 disparate data types, 3 different types, like say a spreadsheet of your affiliate partners, and then you're pulling stock quotes from an open source like finance at Yahoo, and then you're getting descriptions from Wikipedia or DBpedia, which is the Wikipedia database. And then you feed it into a database to make this uniform, like an RDF database. Then you can do whatever you want with that data. It's all in a uniform format, so you can query that database, and Sparkle is a query engine. If you know what SQL is, it's like, let's ask it, how many of our affiliate partners have stock prices below $10? Or how many of our affiliate partners have publicly traded companies that are in this industry? And that's hugely boring. I mean, everybody here just flatlined, right? That was the most boring thing ever. But for the same thing, let's say instead of a spreadsheet, you pull data out of somebody's email or the email list that you have. And then instead of finance at Yahoo, you pulled OpenGeo information from Maps. And you pulled weather from, instead of Wikipedia, you pulled weather from an open weather source. Now it's getting interesting, because now you have TripIt, right? And TripIt just exited for $120 million. More sophisticated, it's scaled up, it's different, but it's the same basic thing. You pull different data types, you're mashing data up, and you're providing something that's not just content, but a content platform, or content as apps. So by taking all these different data sources and mashing them up, you're kind of rolling your own and creating useful content that's not just, we hired an army of writers at $5 an article to create really optimized text across the long tail. So you can start thinking about what you're doing with data. Since the Brits lead everything when it comes to this, I got to give the Brits call outs. The BBC actually has a publishing environment around this. They are ahead of this game by far. So what they do is for the World Cup 2010, they didn't have journalists create pages for England and pages for Group C and results pages and things like that in traditional CMS format. What they did is they said, let's pump all this data into those RDF databases I talked about, our assets, our video, our scores, our results, the articles. And then let's have this publishing environment be dynamic. So they create these pages that are really awesome for users. They've got scores and they've got all the things you want about World Cup, and they're dynamically updating, and then journalists don't have to touch it. You don't have to go to a CMS and do anything with these pages because they're automatically being created from all the data that you've put in that RDF database or any other kind of database that you have that has that linked data attribute to it. So there's a couple links there that you can look at what they've done. I mean, it's the forefront of how publishers are going to become more efficient and publish across the web without having to say, we need tons of people to get into the CMS and put content out. They do the same thing with their music pages. So they have some data about bands, and they have some descriptions, and they have music showcases and when they've played it. But what they do is instead of using just their data, they pull similar data out from other linked open databases on the web. So they've got what they've put in their RDF database, and then they pull from Wikipedia's open source database, and they pull from MusicBrainz, and they pull from Audio Showcase, and they pull from their own record lists. And they build these really rich, weaved-in pages of data that, I mean, this is what's going to be awesome for users, right? Rather than just saying, hey, we have 2 paragraphs of text about this band that we had somebody write really cheaply. We've pulled from all these other awesome databases around the web to combine with our data to create pages that users are going to love. So that's the idea. It's more efficient. Users, it's better for users, better for the search engines because they can see reliable data. Everybody wins in that scenario. Everybody should read this. This is a semantic web presentation that was done at the same time as SMX Advanced. And Adly, you got to look at how they're using linked data because this is, you might get an idea of what data you have on your sites and what platforms you're using and how you can build that out with linked data integration. So for example, Toyota wants to promote the Swagger Wagon. Do they use Justin Bieber? Adly connects celebrities to brands by doing sponsored and promoted tweets. So they need to know, hey, Toyota wants to promote the Swagger Wagon through Twitter. Do we hook them up with Justin Bieber? How are they going to get that data? So they have basic information on a celebrity. They have, like, for Snoop Dogg, they have his avatar, they have the number of followers, what cities he's popular in, how many followers, how average retweets. They have some basic data about a celebrity. But they want to build that out to make it more useful to their users and both brands and their customers. So what do? From a semantic web standpoint, they pull out to all those linked open databases. They've got their data in an RDF database, and then they pull out to MusicBrainz, and they pull out to Freebase, which is a terabyte-sized, multiple terabyte-sized Google database, and they say, what else can I pull about Snoop? Can I figure out that he's not just a rapper, but he's a musician, he's an actor, when he was born, what other groups he's in, what movies he's in, what aliases he's had. And so they build out all these different databases that say, okay, now we have way more information on Snoop. Now we know that that we can connect him with brands that are looking for not just a musician, but a rapper, and somebody who's an actor, and somebody who's married, and they make that connection. So obviously, you might look at their initial set of data and say, yeah, Justin Bieber's as good as Snoop. Let's connect him with the Swagger Wagon. Obviously, once you start building data out, you realize that you want to connect Toyota with Snoop because that's going to be, the best sponsor tweet that you get. Definitely watch that presentation. It's awesome. And then if you want to publish content, you can start doing that. So we see pages where they're building out for their advertisers for like Adam Carolla, where they had limited data on him at first. They used their data mashed up with all these linked open source databases or open data and made these very rich pages. So the idea is if you're getting it, you can make unique content that's awesome for users with what you have versus everything else that's out there. Well, combined with everything else that's out there, so using this linked open data protocol. So structured data and marking up your own data in your web pages is sort of the first step, and then it's what can we do with what we have? What can we do with what's out there? Well, there's a ton out there. This looks like the old Bruce Clay search engine chart, but this is a cloud, as of September 2010, of all of these linked open data sources out there. There's ones in geography, there's maps, there's weather, there's science, there's BBC Music. DBpedia is an entire data source that you can pull from Wikipedia. Freebase, which Google bought in 2010, Freebase has celebrities and movies and things, and all those web of objects that Stefan talked about, they're in databases all around here. And so you can pull them in. Usually there's like a license where you attribute content to them. But if you're thinking like a search marketer, you're thinking, how can I be in that cloud? how can I put data out there that people pull from? If you like embedded things, if you're a search marketer because you get links back, what if you had an immensely powerful, popular data source that you were in that cloud, and people were linking to you as a data source? And so you're starting to look at, wow, we can not only bring in better content for our users on our site, we can be ubiquitous and useful to users on other sites when people are using our data. So this web of things or web of objects kind of exists in this realm right now with this linked open data cloud. So there's more here than I thought I would find when I started this presentation. There's a lot of stuff. There's science and all these things that may pertain to what your site is doing or what your web of sites is doing. So some other resources here. Kasabi is sort of like that cloud you just saw in very easy to search format. So if you go to Kasabi, they have like New York Transit Metro data sets. They have data sets for Foodista. They have data sets for science and BBC Music that you can really easy build queries from. So this is an example of what you can pull from Foodista. It's weird. Stefan said the carrot julienne. This is an actual Sparkle query for show me all the recipes that use grated carrots. It's like we had a weird connection there or something like that. So you go to Foodista and you say, okay, I have a food site and I want to pull from Foodista all these recipes that have grated carrots in them, and then I want to weave them in with my data, and you could build an interactive recipe builder, you could build a data table, you could build an infographic. If you're starting to, as a search marketer, think about things like dynamic, scalable infographics across the long tail, whereas you don't just have one page with an infographic, but you have 50,000 pages with awesome infographics that dynamically update because they change when the linked data cloud that you're using changes. You're starting to get it. And so what's nice about this room is the people that are developing this technology, the semantic web and linked data, they don't have what you have in here, which is all the search marketing knowledge, the audience knowledge, the knowledge of how to make this work on the web. They have the technology side of it. So what's going to be powerful is the search marketers that get a hold of this and learn how to use this. It's going to be like the next wave of, hey, we don't just mark up our site, we don't just build links, we do all these other awesome platform-based things that are building user bases and building attention. A couple other resources. Drupal is RDF7 good to go right out of the box. If you were choosing a CMS and you said, I want to take RDF data in, and publish it out via RDFA, have people link into and out of it, Drupal 7 has it built into its core. So if you're selecting a CMS out of the box, do that. IBM has great tutorials on how to take Drupal, put data into RDF format so you get that structured data on your web pages, but also link out and bring data in. So those are good tutorials. Ontotext. So one of the things about this linked data is once you get those relationships, the stapler is the color red. Those ontologies are developed by something called, OWL, or a web ontology. It tells that you pump data in, and the ontology determines, like, I know a stapler is an object. I know that it is the color red, and I know what a color is. So by taking data and putting it into these OWL databases, that's when you get the relationships that Stefan was talking about in terms of the red stapler. Ontotext is a good source to get started with this because you can actually download a desktop light version of it, put data in there and watch what happens and pump it out and query it via an ontology. So if you want to get your feet wet in how putting data into a web database works and an ontology database and how to query it, Ontotext is a good place to start. Syndicy is like the competitive research tool for the semantic web. So what you do on Syndicy is you put in something like movies, and it crawls the web and looks for sites that are using microformats for things like movies. So like what's IMDb using? Are they using RDFA? Are they using microformats? Are they using microdata? How are they using it? What data sources are they pulling it from? So this is, I'm using this as a competitive research tool to say, hey, in these categories for my clients, who's got the edge? Who's doing things that are interesting and how are they doing them? Sigma is a way to start creating your own mashups out of semantic data. What you can do with Sigma, and it's sig.ma, is you can type in something like, in this case, Crispin Glover. And you can say, okay, what microdata is available? What are people publishing in the linked data cloud about this? And what's cool about it is you can select these data sources to the right and select what's going on the side, and then create these embeddable widgets. So in other words, you can select a bunch of sources and say, okay, I want this in RDF form. I want this in JavaScript object notation form. I just want a tiny URL to this. And you can start embedding widgets in your pages and seeing how you might be able to dynamically publish based on available stuff that's out there. Now, you got to be careful. It's like some of these sources might not be too good with you scraping like that. There's this, we haven't gotten to the scraping part of the linked data cloud yet, but this is a good way to get your feet wet in how you would embed other people's data into your data in the open data cloud. Other resources on the web, obviously I won't expect anybody to go ahead and read this right now, but there's a bunch of good primers. I mean, I'm getting my feet wet in here. I'm starting to learn how to use Python, to use scripting. SEOs that figure out how to use this technology and call databases and use scripts to pull information out of RDF databases and learn how to use Sparkle to query databases are going to have a huge advantage on the SEOs that are not able to do that, because they're going to be steps ahead of being able to pull from these databases. Follow these folks on Twitter. Really good. Those three people have a really strong bridge between the semantic web and link data and the SEO community. So at the end of the day, users, you get kick-ass content in one place. If you start making these mashups, these data mashups that are really useful, you're thinking about building things like TripIt. You probably have tons of good content and data on your site. How can you take it from more places and aggregate it and make better user content? Search engines get that, what Stefan was talking about in terms of they get structured data that's more reliable. They get more information about person, place, things, objects, and relationships. And so it's easier for them to determine that, semantic text versus what we're doing now, which is all those keywords. And you get happy users, you get money, you get vacations. At the end of the day, you don't have to worry about that inefficient publishing problem for narrow shoes or narrow shoe sizes. And the most important thing, last slide, is David Min wears trucker hats. And that's my PowerPoint revenge against David Min for what he did to me yesterday. Achievement unlocked. Thank you.